All right, while the audience collects some questions, I'm going to start things off. This is a dark fairy tale that some critics have, reminded them of Let the Right One In or Pan's Labyrinth. Were these films influential? Was that what you set out to make, a dark fairy tale? Is that an accurate sort of description of the film?
Yeah, I think that's kind of where it landed. And it made sense that it did, because when it comes to horror, I was sort of late to the party, per se. It was late in my studies at Columbia University that I kind of came upon it, and the films that, because growing up I was so scared shitless of horror, and it would like,
Me too.
yeah, and I grew up in like a strict household that didn't really allow us to watch it either. It wasn't until late that the films that kind of gave me or invited me into and said like, yeah, you know, you have a place to play here, were those kind of films. Was the Del Toro and Let the Right One In. Those films like, oh, okay, like I could, this speaks my language.
Was Mina's character's name a nod to Bram Stoker's Dracula?
It was. I've gotten that question before, yeah, and actually, honestly, it wasn't. It's just a coincidence. I was just, usually when I'm writing a script and I'm looking for names, I want it to be meaningful in some way. And I can't even remember now, but it was something, Mina had something to do with it. It was aggressive, but it was also like angelic, and it was like a hero and a protector, but also there was some other connotation to it that really fit perfectly, and that's where it came from.
Was Mina sort of fully drawn when you wrote her on the page in terms of her sort of supernatural component, that she's sort of an undead being, a ghoul of some sort? Was that kind of the idea at the offset, or did you go through multiple iterations to get to
multiple iterations? What Mina was from the offset, like I always say like I wrote this script angry. I wanted to, initially, like I did a short called The Dark, which is really more of a sketch of this. It wasn't a really like short to feature. Because I didn't have a long history in genre, I was kind of testing things out, being like, oh, can this work, what I'm trying to do? And then once the short people seemed to like it, I was like, okay, so that gave me the confidence to take the next step. And for the short, the idea was, basically, I seen Let the Right One In, loved Let the Right One In, but I had this kind of like itch that was, I would love to see that movie from Eli's perspective. And from the vampire's perspective. And then that went down the road of like the monster's perspective, and then I was looking at, the backstories of Candyman and Jason Voorhees, and like how they're actually kind of sympathetic backstories and things like that. And that kind of was like, okay, so that's interesting to do a film from the perspective of the monster. And then it was finding that monster. And once I landed on Mina for various reasons, personal and whatnot, it really hit home, and I was like really, like I felt that rage that she did. So I think that component of her character was always there, this kind of like being almost like a rage monster, but then not having a long history in genre. I knew that there were like, oh, I gotta know the rules, I gotta define the rules and have that work. And I did so many iterations of the script where I was trying to make that work, and then one day I was like, you know what, fuck it, like she just, like all these films are playing with the rules of nature to their own ends, and I was like, and a little bit with 28 Days Later, I had the idea of like the rage, even though that was still like a virus and this isn't, but I was like, this character, I don't want her to be dead. She's not done. She's not done yet. Like, and if anybody has a reason, she does. And I just said that's the rule. And then I started sending the script out to people who had read it before, and they're like, oh, it's so much better now. It totally works. And they didn't need the explanations for whatever. So yeah, it was interesting how that worked. And then when I premiered the film, I got a lot of questions about making a zombie film, and I was like, oh right, I did, I guess. Didn't realize I did that. I knew she was undead, but I was like, oh right, okay.
That's interesting. Do we have questions from the audience? Anyone? All right, we'll keep thinking of questions. Oh, right there.
What was the logic behind having Mina kill her mother but not go after her mother's boyfriend. Was there a logic there?
Did why did the Mina not go after the boyfriend, or you just
If
decided?
I'm Mina, I'm gunning for him, you know?
Oh, I mean,
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a fair, there was an iteration of the script where she did, and I didn't go with that. It's, the reason for me, right or wrong, was that, you know, and like I said, there's personal aspects of the film. This is a film for me that was a film for the victims. And I wanted to, and I was kind of like my North Star for this film was always trying to be true to the kids' experiences and people, you know, and to that experience. And from an audience perspective, it's like, you know, that's the rousing moment, is that she gets to kill, you know, to vanquish her aggressor. But for most people, that's not the case. For, well, I'd say the majority of people, that's not the case. And usually, and obviously, you know, the film exists in an allegorical realm, and I think more often it's the people that are closest to us. A lot of times, it's the people on the periphery who were there and seeing things and didn't do anything about it. You know, it's just more complicated than bad guy gets it, is basically, I think, where it came from for me. If I'm really being truthful about the situation. But it's well taken. I mean, I've definitely had the same conversation where the people was like, you know what, I would love to have that moment. And I get that too.
Other questions, right there.
I just wanted to say, I would say that if she killed him for real, then she would be done. And she's not done. And like the movie would be over as well, I mean, be that. So there is that, the thing of rage that keeps her going as long as she keeps going. I feel like there's that that's happening.
I love a discourse within the audience. Do we have other questions as well? Yes, right there.
I'd like to ask, as the film progresses and Mina starts to develop feeling again and you know, turns into a human child, is that the entire idea that she's able to heal when she finds someone else who has a shared or similar trauma?
The question is regarding the sort of healing process that Mina goes through, and whether that is literal or allegorical, or both.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably, as if we're, you know, within the world of the film, it's both, or it's literal, but the experience is allegorical. I mean, it's ultimately, it's the experience of an abuse victim who's finding, it's two really, you know, abuse victims who are finding kind of their way forward in the world through each other and through their mutual understanding and their kind of like shared experience. Sorry. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, we've talked a lot about Mina. I'm wondering, was Alex in the script from the beginning, or was that kind of a logical point of, like, who would Mina encounter that begins to change her? How did that develop?
I mean, Alex was in the script. Well, Alex was in the short too. It was, again, a little bit different. The feature is really the fully realized version of what I was going for in the short, but it was just because of resources and things. You know, making a student film, you just aren't able to do some things you want to do that I was able to do in the feature. Luckily, thanks to people like Andrew. Yeah, I mean, it was always these two, and that was always the challenge with writing the script. It was kind of like, I've set up these two kids who have every reason and just simply don't trust anybody. And so they're not going to speak to each other or anybody. And so I was like, okay, well, how am I going to tell their stories, you know? And it just had to be piecemeal. It had to be slowly, step by step, you know? And like, and it was just, you know, there's always that urge to like, yeah, but I need to explain things. And I was like, again, the North Star is like, yeah, but they wouldn't. So I just had to stay true to that the entire time. And they just had to slowly open up to each other. And it's always, for me, like somebody, I think in another Q&A asked me like what my favorite part is, and it's always that hug at the table. It always feels like this release. It's just like, God, these two kids needed that, you know? Like, I always really love that moment.
Yes, right there.
It felt like the two protagonists had a lot of similarities, but then were also mirrored in a lot of ways, like in the way that Mina at a point felt like she didn't want to kill anymore, and Alex, kills that woman and doesn't really seem to care. Both of their mothers almost seem like mirror mothers. I guess I was just wondering what it was like writing the characters and sort of balancing their similarities and balancing their differences.
Questions regard contrasting the two characters of Mina and Alex while writing the script and shooting the film, and how that they sort of mirror each other, but also reflect each other in kind of opposing extremities.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely there, and it's also, like, you see when Alex, Mina has that moment in the mirror, and then we cut to Alex, and it's like almost like a mirror image, and that's very much in there, and it's also kind of how we were talking about why she doesn't kill him, is she sees something of herself in him, but she's further along in that journey in a way than he is, and that's kind of what happens is he was with this man for all this time that he had a very complicated relationship with, who kind of was his tormentor but also his protector. So it makes sort of sense that he gravitates towards Mina, and he kind of is more what she needs, like, than necessarily, she kind of realizes that she's not necessarily what he needs. And it's that selfless kind of moment for her to say, go off, and you have a mother that needs you and wants you. That kind of allows her to heal as well.
We got time for one more question right over here. Yeah.
My question is, in regard to Alex's backstory, it kind of fleshed out a little bit, but what I gathered was Joseph was some kind of priest from some kind of cult, or was there any kind of hints as to exactly how Alex's backstory kind of played out? Like, was he kidnapped and then?
The question is sort of regarding the details that you leave a bit enigmatic and ambiguous in the film, but we do see a rosary bead on the rear view mirror, so I suppose those are clues.
Yeah, there's a rosary bead and then there's a lighter. I mean, and I've heard that before, that Joseph is a priest. I actually, the backstory for what I had was that Joseph was actually abused by a priest, but there's quite a lot to deal with, like the cycles of abuse here. And some people miss, Joseph also has a burn on his hand that kind of, forecasts his affinity for burning. But yeah, it's kind of, Alex was kidnapped by Joseph, and again, it's kind of, there wasn't a ton of exposition here, and you do kind of have to take some leaps and bounds with him, because also the film is so subjective to Mina. I have heard, criticisms that, like, some people would have liked to have more flashbacks with Alex. As a devotee of subjectivity with film, I just, you just can't jump into somebody else's head when you're.
The one that I like to bring up before we conclude, though, is I do really like how it's interesting that the movie begins with Joseph's subjectivity, and there is that shift, which I think is pretty neat. Was that something always from the start, was an idea, or was that something of, like, when figuring out how do I enter into this world? Like,
it's an homage to Psycho. I love subjectivity. It's like it's such a useful tool as a filmmaker, and I thought, what better way to introduce the monster of the film, which is actually our protagonist, without hitting the nail on the head, than to, like, kind of have that red herring a little bit, where you think you're with this one guy. But I mean, the camera never really goes into his subjectivity, really. So you're always kind of kept at a distance from him, but to some extent, you're like, this is our guy because he's getting the screen time. And then there's a very strong shift in subjectivity when we go into kind of her perspective on him dead. And then it's sort of the moment, the hole through you know, the hole through the wall in Psycho, where we kind of go into Norman Bates' perspective, and suddenly the camera's given to him, and it's like, oh, we're somewhere else now. We're with someone else now. Yeah, I mean, that was a way to. Everything about this was always kind of, how can I do a film where I know this character is going to be doing some things that are really challenging to an audience, and they're going to look a way that's really challenging to the audience, and how do I create subjectivity and an experience where we're with them and we're okay to go on that journey. And so every decision is kind of just walking that tightrope of trying to make that work.